Just over 10 years ago, when we created Climate Change, the New Economy, the world leaders gathered at a summit in Italy and for the first time declared that climate change is one of the greatest challenges of our time. As leaders of the world's major economies, both developed and developing, we intend to respond vigorously to this challenge. At that time, business, NGOs, intergovernmental organizations such as the United Nations, and academia were already at the forefront of climate action, with scientists warning about the consequences of runaway climate change. But despite the leaders' reassurance of a vigorous response to the climate challenge, policy signals were weak and the diplomatic negotiations painstakingly slow, suffering many setbacks. Until 2015, when after decades of negotiations under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, a historic legally binding agreement was adopted in Paris at COP21 conference by all 197 parties. It was a universal action plan to avoid dangerous climate change, designed to help keep global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels, with the ambition not to go above 1.5 degrees. Each country set their own emission reduction targets, known as intended nationally determined contributions, with an aim to report on the progress and increase commitments in the years ahead. I remember the Paris Agreement caused so much euphoria and optimism, with thousands of delegates attending, even though the atrocious terrorist attacks shook Paris to the core only some days before COP21. The agreement was a breath of fresh air and sent a clear signal that the future of the global economy will be powered by low-carbon, climate-resilient growth. The message was clear. Those who were reluctant to innovate and transform to embrace the green economy were going to be left behind. A wider involvement of the civil society, regions and cities in climate action was gathering momentum. People started to realize that they can make greener lifestyle choices. So mindsets were shifting. Change was coming. However, still, some developed and developing countries had emissions reduction policies that were really lagging behind despite the Paris pledges. This was partially because some political leaders believed that strong environmental policies would hamper economic development. Some still do. In countries that depend on fossil fuels, that was particularly true because they were reluctant to phase the fossil fuels out. But it's imperative to set fossil fuel stop dates and put price on carbon as well to stop the planet from overheating. So in October 2018, the IPCC, which is the intergovernmental organization assessing the science related to climate change, published its global warming of 1.5 degrees special report. It presented new scientific evidence which showed what the global warming of 1.5 degrees meant compared to 2 degrees. To avert irreversible biodiversity losses and prevent catastrophic weather events, we actually needed to global the warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, because a warming of 2 degrees would practically destroy the life on the planet as we know it. So to illustrate what a difference just half a degree of warming makes, so there is a chance, for example, of some tropical coral reef surviving with warming of 1.5 degrees. They virtually disappear with 2 degrees warming. The report emphasized that limiting warming to 1.5 degrees was still possible, but would require unprecedented transition in all areas of the society and scaling up of technologies that would help to cut emissions in half by 2030 and achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Net zero emissions meant that any remaining emissions would need to be balanced by removing carbon dioxide from the air. So the race to zero, net zero, began, literally and metaphorically, as we had even less time than we originally thought to save life on the planet. Last year, actually, the UK became the first major economy in the world to pass laws to bring all greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. And later, the Race to Zero campaign was launched, mobilizing a coalition of net zero initiatives across the globe, representing 452 cities, 22 regions, 1,101 businesses, 45 of the biggest investors, and 549 universities. These real economy actors committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050 at the latest. Many climate action networks and organizations support Race to Zero, including TED's Countdown, a social network, We Don't Have Time, is at the forefront of efforts to connect everyone who wants to solve the climate crisis via their innovative app. So, yet despite this widespread mobilization of climate effort, we still haven't changed enough our old behaviors to stop temperatures rising dramatically, too dramatically. So last November, a global team of more of 11,000 scientists from 153 countries officially declared that the world is in a climate emergency. Untold human suffering is unavoidable without deep and lasting shifts in human activities, they said, and warned that climate change is accelerating faster than many scientists expected, while we are still in the business as usual mode. And the consequences of this business as usual we actually observed earlier this year with the Australian fires. We saw a report of the Arctic heating up faster, twice as fast actually, than the rest of the planet, and Siberia's permafrost melting. Not to mention the worst in history, floods in Bangladesh and surprisingly Sudan. We have pushed so many planetary boundaries and disrespected Earth systems with reckless resource depletion and fossil fuel burning that the planet has become unstable. When the COVID pandemic arrived, it was hard not to see that all the events were interconnected. Evidence suggests that combination of deforestation, biodiversity loss and climate change contribute to an increased risk of zoonotic pandemics such as the COVID one. So the current health crisis is not an isolated event. It is linked to the climate crisis and the ecosystems crisis as well. Is it possible then that we can address all three with one strategy that would also aid economic recovery? Do economic recovery packages that countries have rolled out present once in a lifetime opportunity to recover greener and better? Could we kickstart a new wave of sustainable growth with investments channeled to secure a clean, carbon-free future? Not only for the planet, but of course also for its inhabitants. So where do we start to build back better then? Of course, we need to demand sharp and decisive policies from our governments to form the backbone of the green recovery. The UK government has a unique opportunity to showcase the country as a global leader, global climate leader, as it will be hosting the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, in partnership with Italy in November 2021 in Glasgow. So let's see what the UK government has been doing to live up to our expectations as the forthcoming host of the most important COP conference since Paris. We can be encouraged by the fact that over the past decade, the UK has cut carbon emissions by more than any similar developed country. Last year, UK emissions were 42% lower than in 1990, while the UK economy actually grew over the same period by 72%. So this is a perfect example that economic growth and emissions reductions can go hand in hand. So it is, in a sense, a race against time, and but it's also a tremendous opportunity for us all to build healthier and more sustainable lives and to preserve the natural environment that we have been so recklessly destroying. I have asked Nick Nuttall, Strategic Communications Director at We Don't Have Time, the social network I mentioned earlier, and also he is the former spokesperson for the United Nations Climate Change and the historic Paris Agreement, to set us off on this journey to a better, a greener future with some wise words. And that is what he's had to say. The United Nations Climate Change Conference COP26 that the UK will be holding in 2021 needs to mark a dramatic raise of ambition by all nations and sectors of the global economy. Citizens have a vital role to play by holding their elected representatives to account, exercising green consumer power, and speaking out on the urgency of action in their places of work and communities. Whether it be the northwest of England, eastern China, southern Chile, or western United States, people everywhere have the power and responsibility to shape a positive future for themselves, their friends, and their families. Thank you for listening.